Hello, these are my hands, this is my voice, and here's something pretty unique and strange. It's the artwork to the album Synthesizer by the band A Place to Bury Strangers. This isn't mine. My friend Phil, who I've mentioned on the channel before as an enabler of a lot of the gear I do end up buying. Hi, Phil. He bought the album, and it came with the artwork being a functional circuit board to build a synthesizer / kind of audio effects mangler. And between him and I sourcing parts and then me soldering it together, I've got it here working. And before I give it back to him, I wanted to kind of mess around with it because it's very crazy and hard to pin down, but a lot of fun. It's kind of cool. I should say off the top, I'm not even that familiar with the band A Place to Bury Strangers, aside from knowing that they're affiliated with the Death by Audio pedal company. Like I said, I didn't buy this. I'm putting it together for a friend as an instrument, but in so doing, I have kind of fallen in love with it and kind of want my own now. You'll hear why a little later. I did listen to the album at least once while putting this together, in case you're curious. It is gnarly and intense and loud in all the ways you would expect from something like this. So if you like that type of music, you'll probably enjoy it, and certainly this instrument. But what this won't be is a tutorial on the feature set of this particular synth kind of effect unit, because I honestly still can't quite figure some of it out to explain, because it's kind of inscrutable intentionally, I think. Forces you into some avenues, and things are coupled in certain ways that kind of you have to discover yourself, really, and find patches you like and ways to use it that work for you in kind of a nasty, kind of fun way. But I did want to touch on some things on the build process. So what advice or tips can I give to someone who may be about to take this on and build this themselves or build this for a friend? Well, I'm about an intermediate builder, I would say. I build some pedals and repair some gear here and there, and I have built some Death by Audio based circuits before, and they're usually quite gnarly and crazy. So I'm not inexperienced, but I'm not an expert. So maybe that puts me at a unique position. You might know more than me even looking at this and how to build it yourself. But let's say you're approaching this at about my level or under. I would say there are a couple things I did learn. The main thing that really stopped this from working when we first fired it up was fake chips. That's a real bummer, but these are my CA3080 OTA chips, and I've had these for years. I did not buy them from a shady source or whatever. I probably got them from one of the usual places I would get my parts from. And it turns out this batch, these 5, they're all marked the same. They're all fake, or at least not functional. In the circuit, there was volume, and it seemed like it would be fine, but nothing was working in terms of modulating the VCA or anything like that. So thankfully, I have this guy here, which is a workalike of a Ross compressor, and they use a CA3080 chip. So I had been working on this using a different chip that I had hoarded for years, took it out, put it in here, that's the chip there, and it worked fine. So unfortunately, a lot of my troubleshooting mistakes came from sourcing the CA3080 from, I guess, a bad batch or a fake batch years ago. So watch out for that, because that chip is a little hard to find now. I think Small Bear has them. They're expensive. Stompboxparts.com has them for like $8.25 US, which in Canada, that's like a mortgage. But, if you got to, you got to. So you can still get them, but make sure you're getting them from a real source. Another one, let's flip it over, actually. I've got a piece of foam underneath it or bubble wrap underneath it just in case, but you can kind of see what we're dealing with here. It's probably really dirty and reflective looking, but so this is the circuit board itself where you solder to. And one thing, just coming from pedal building where the circuits are this big, the ground plane on this guy is massive. This is all ground. These are all connected as ground. And so just the size of this board and the size that the ground plane is going to be means it can kind of act like a bit of a heat sink. So sometimes I found, depending on the iron I was using, because I used mine and I used Phil's at his house if I was there, I found it harder to get solder connections to the ground plane because of how big and wide it is. And I think it was probably acting like a heat sink and spreading out the heat I was applying. So it almost became more tacky than actually soldered. Now, interestingly enough, our two irons were both set around 370 degrees. Mine was perfectly fine, and Phil's made it a bit tacky. So I don't know, you might, depending on your iron as well, you can't always trust what temperature it says, and you don't necessarily want to go too high, but you may or may not have problems just with the ground plane being so big. But with my iron that I use all the time, it was fine. So just keep that in mind. Something else to consider, there are a lot of large components like pots and jacks and switches and things that you might need help holding to the board while you flip it over to solder. In my case, we use tape to tape each knob, each potentiometer down one at a time, flip it over, tacked it in, and made sure it was good and straight. The silk screen on the board tells you exactly where it should go, and you line it up, it looks great. The toggles I had the most problem doing myself. So in those cases, Phil would hold the toggle and I would tack the one lug in, and then I could do the rest. But it's a bit tricky. You might need some tape or some kind of adhesive to help get the bigger pieces to stay on the board as you're soldering. Something else to consider, it's like, where's Waldo populating this thing? There's so many resistors. So trying to find that like 470K that I think it's actually right there, but trying to find them on the board, you can kind of scan and lose your mind because they're spread out all over the place. So just have patience, go through it slowly, measure your components before you put them in. That's a habit I've gotten into, is measuring each resistor to make sure it is what it says it is before I put it in. That way it just saves troubleshooting later. But yeah, you're going to have to take your time because it can be very puzzling to find which resistor goes where, the way it's all so big and spread out. And then finally on the build side, before we get to some sound samples, which I know you probably skipped ahead to already if you're like me, but the schematic that they've provided is very comprehensive. So it does have all the sections and everything, all the components, and even test points and things where the 5-volt voltage should be going and things like that. But it doesn't always match the silk screen on the board itself. So some things are labeled differently on some of these toggles, they're not what they say on the schematic. So I think one of them says VCA open. I think that's this one. On the schematic, it says VCA open. Here, I think it's oscillator and trigger. So just keep that in mind if you're troubleshooting like I was, because I didn't know one of my chips was fake. You may run into confusion a bit with the labeling on the schematic versus the silk screen. That's not super uncommon. And in general, the schematic is very helpful and clear to read. It's broken down nicely in components, which is good to follow. Just keep that in mind, though. Some things don't match what you see on the silk screen. And then there are no real instructions on how to use this thing. And I don't think that's a bad thing. That's just more of a, food for thought, because the way it's laid out, and we'll get into that as we make some noise, it is hard to maybe figure out, especially if you're looking at it like I am from a normal kind of subtractive synth, kind of let's make pretty noises kind of perspective. It can be hard to understand how some of these interact and what to do. I think the key that they want you to do here is experiment, make noises that are fun to you, and how you get there is how you get there. Okay, let's make some noise. I've got the output plugged into the same mixer my voice is going through, so hopefully we can find kind of a balance and they don't conflict too much, but I'll raise the volume slowly and you'll hear what I mean. Some destructive texture coming up here. I'll crank it a bit. Dial it back so we can kind of set something up first. That is a bit of an electrocuted ambulance sound happening so far, courtesy of the LFO modulating oscillator 1, I think. Again, sometimes it's hard to figure out what this is doing, and I think that's part of the charm. But we're just going to make some noise. These two rotary switches kind of dictate what's going where. So right now, like I said, LFO 1 is modulating oscillator 1 in this position, is my understanding. And the envelope here is sending to the filter, the VCF. And then, of course, we have our triggers. Our piezo there, and then there's a tap point on the board. Honestly, you can kind of, with the sensitivity up, you can kind of tap anything on the board and it works because the piezo is right now just tacked with sticky tack to the board. So the vibrations all kind of, they handshake each other somewhere. So now right now I don't really have the trigger set specifically to do anything. It's just kind of doing its thing. So let's just keep making noise. can bring in the delay. I haven't talked about that at all. This is a dual delay section here. So echo 1 goes into echo 2. Everything kind of goes into the echo section and then out here. So right now I have them set too similarly. Let's change them up. So here's echo 1 at its lowest all the way to its highest. Feedback is not at oscillation level. And then echo 2 will keep kind of halfway up. So there you go. You've already got something fun. Now, the only way to change pitch right now is via the oscillator knobs themselves. And I haven't really gotten into what this rotary switch is doing because this one's hard to pin down. My understanding is this is what oscillator 2 and 3 are modulating with their audio rate. I'm not sure if that's right, but basically it didn't make sense to me to go the opposite way because this is the encoder that is sending your LFO and your envelope to various sources. So by that, I think this is the encoder that sends oscillator 2 and 3 to modulate various sources. Someone can correct me. I don't really care at all. It all sounds weird and fun no matter what you do. And then let's flip this knob here so trigger will actually dictate the sound. So right now, there's no trigger happening, there's no sound. My sticky tack is coming loose. We can adjust the envelope decay. Put it all the way up, just for... You can set the sweep. I'm not quite sure what that's actually doing, but it is affecting the envelope kind of shape or depth, maybe. In any case, it's kind of cool. You can see this being a drone underneath something. So right now LFO is going to VCA, envelope's going to the filter. And then we've got oscillator 2 and 3 are both modulating oscillator 1, I think. All right, I've got a guitar plugged in now to show you kind of what the audio in can do. And this is where it gets pretty cool because now you can use it kind of as an effect unit for an audio source, but also you can trigger the synth itself with an audio source or another external trigger. So right now I've got, let's see, if I flip, for instance, here's the sound. Now if I flip these toggles to have the external source react more, or the synth react more to the external source. So the trigger, these two are, the trigger and the external in are connected. I'm set oscillator won't engage unless triggered. So the VCA is not open. And then the external in is dictating oscillator 2 and 3, I guess, their modulation cycle maybe. I'm not sure. But let's do it. This is going to be weird and fun. I should add the delay's not on yet in this patch, so let's try it. Let's throw some delay. So there you go, like a wah, distorted wah delay from an album cover. Let's try this. Short envelope decay. Kind of fun. Let's add some delay. I switched up the lengths of echo 1 and echo 2. Kind of fun. And then we can up the envelope decay if we want. All right, that's kind of fun. And more delay. Just let it drone. By self-oscillation, I should say. There are drone settings in here. This is just the delay going nuts. And finally, for now, let's just put on a simple drum beat through the deluge. This is just using one of the stock kits, like an 808 kit, I believe. And we're just going to mangle it with this. I've routed the cables differently for a hot minute. Bear with me. Simple drum beat. That's all that's being fed into this. Keep that in mind for what's to come. It's just a simple little beat. This is all the dirt and fun is coming from the Synthesizer album by A Place to Bury Strangers. Let's check it out. Sometimes you turn something or do something and it doesn't do what you wanted it to do. It's kind of cool. So changed our beat very drastically by flipping the shape of oscillator 3, which is now modulating oscillator 1, I believe. Our envelope is right now routed to the VCF, so that's why you're hearing that kind of sweep. Kind of a nice little jam, just switching between these two. Okay, why don't I just mess around with some of what these settings are? Who knows? There you go. Kind of that wah. There's no like LFO sync or rate sync or anything. You got to do it by ear or hand, which is cool. That's kind of nice and grimy. So we're getting some of the beat coming through there. I'm just gonna keep messing around. You can stick around if you want. Maybe you can't hear me talking over this. I don't know. I can't tell, but I'm just having fun. So hopefully you got something out of this. Check this out. It's still available on Bandcamp, I think, to buy the actual vinyl and the kit with the parts, or like you could do what I did for my friend Phil. He bought the vinyl with the circuit board, and then I helped him source the parts. Depending on where you live, that could be cheaper. It might not be, but it's fun. I don't know. I'm having a good time.